Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday morning webinar series. I am Chloe Tetro, the health coach here with Ready Care for this morning. We're going to be looking at the topic of connection, what it means to be connected, and the paradox that is currently happening in a hyper-connected reality where more and more people are feeling disconnected, lonely, left behind. So the loneliness has reached epidemic levels, even as technology makes it easier to connect. So, globally, about 1 in 4 people report feeling very or fairly lonely on a regular basis. About 20% of adults feel lonely every day at some point, and nearly 1 in 4 older individuals are socially isolated. Now, that isolation in and of itself is connected to a higher risk of dementia and other life-threatening conditions. And when it comes to younger people, they're not particularly immune to the phenomenon either. So many adolescents and young adults are quote unquote digitally connected, but emotionally detached. And for those working with younger people or around young people that have had a career spanning, more than 10 years, you would be very aware of that disconnect that is starting to be highlighted with younger people. So a person can have hundreds of online friends and still experience a profound sense of disconnection. So there's a term that's been coined, unfortunately, for this by researchers called extended loneliness. And it's the experience of lacking meaningful relationships, even though you might have lots of online contacts. Now, if you work online, if you work in a team that's remote, if you're, somebody that would be quite online, your Teams app could be going, your WhatsApp could be going all day long, but you basically just feel very, very removed from individuals. And a feeling that we've swapped that authenticity and vulnerability for shallow exchanges, and called that connection, which has a vicious cycle to it, because if we're feeling lonely and we're feeling like we want to connect, and what we experience daily, which is called to us connection, those kind of shallow exchanges, it can lead us to feeling even, compounding that feeling of feeling disappointed, down, isolated, because the very thing that we're looking for, the form that we're getting of it, is actually harming us more so. So in this webinar, what I'll do, and this is still on the back of the World Mental Health Day that happened last week. So on this one, I'm going to look at what actually is connection. What does it actually mean? How does it impact our minds, our bodies, and what effect does this hyper-connected life have on us? So I will touch on some of the good, because it would be, unequal not to do that. But I will touch more on kind of the good, the bad, the ugly side of things, and how to recognize and rebuild more genuine connections in ourselves and others. Now, as always, if you have any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the comment section. So, true connection will go beyond just communicating or being acquainted with somebody. It's about emotional closeness. It's about authenticity and mutual understanding. So, as human beings, we have a fundamental need to belong and form those close bonds. It's one of our lowest rung on the hierarchy of needs, is to have, to belong, to be part of something, to be accepted. So in true connection, what that basically means is feeling seen, feeling heard, and feeling valued by another person, because of course we can feel seen and heard but not necessarily valued, or we can feel seen but not of the others either. So that type of connection will often require vulnerability, and it'll require some trust. So It's the courage, and I know Brene Brown speaks about this at length, which is absolutely brilliant if you're interested in this field of studies. So, the courage basically to share one's actual feelings, one's hopes, and one's fears is a really, really critical part of connection. So, you want to make sure that that shallowness that's been experienced is brought to another depth, and in that depth, there is the frightful process of being known and being seen, which will involve taking down our own defenses, letting our own guard down, letting us be seen as imperfect people, imperfect human beings, and to be received by another as imperfect and still valued, seen, and heard is a much more connecting um, exchange than just what we see a lot of in social media, which I'll touch on here in a minute. When we just portray ourselves at our best consistently, that facade and that mirage and that mask that we uphold with others, if we're accepted for someone that we aren't, it leads us to feeling just as lonely as it would do if we were never, spoken to and related with to begin with. So the very important distinguishing feature here is quantity over quality. Having more people in your network will not resolve a quality problem. So accumulating 1,000 plus followers, or on LinkedIn 500 plus connections, on Facebook, on whatever, when there is a level of lots of different people, we know instinctively it does not equate to quality. So quality needs to take precedence. And basically, all that means is that having one trusted friend or family member, somebody that you can have those types of vulnerable conversation with, that means an awful lot more to people on the day-to-day basis in their experience of the everyday than a large network. So it will never be resolved through more people. The more people that we have does not equate feeling more received, seen, and valued. The loneliness aspect is very subjective in that. That's what I mean about numbers. To the outside world, it may look like you have a very good network of people. And unfortunately, this can happen within friend groups, people that you may have previously had a close connection with, a good intimate bond with. There can be periods of life where we, as well as others, can be taken for granted and take others for granted. And a relationship with intimacy does take an amount of work, only because we all fall into habits, and where something might have been very trusted, when your life changes and when other circumstances and experiences come in there can be a natural drift apart that happens when you don't reconnect. And the version that of you or of the other that you may have formed a close, intimate bond with might be years old, might be 10 years old, might be 20 years old, and it may not resonate to who you currently are now. So it's important to know that it is subjective. You can have a network of people around you and still feel that loneliness. And having it isn't a judgment. Most people experience it at some periods of their life. So if you find yourself in a lonely period in your life, although it can feel difficult to, detach from the feeling of it and view it as a period and moment in your life, for most people, they will experience that at some point. So true connection then, on the flip side, will involve, number one, authenticity. So what we're saying there, the freedom to be your real self without fear or judgment involved. It'll involve mutual empathy and understanding. So each person cares about the other's well-being and understands their perspective. They might not always agree with it. It's not a prerequisite that you would totally agree with somebody that you have a close connection with. The important part is being willing to understand their perspective, even if it differs from your own. And there, what you're doing is you're practicing the other side, right? You're practicing seeing hearing and valuing another person, even if you don't agree on everything. Vulnerability aspect that we spoke of is part in there. So we have authenticity, mutual empathy and understanding, vulnerability, and consistent, meaningful interaction. And this is what I mean, that there can be periods of time where we take each other for granted, but spending that quality time together, having deeper conversations and shared experiences, will foster a sense of presence. So we all have an example of, if I was to say, think of someone that's made you feel really connected to. How did they show up for you? How did they speak to you? How did they listen, more importantly? And an awful lot of the time, it's less predicated on the practicality of advice that somebody gives, how well they can resolve your problems, and more so to do with how well they listen. How much of their attention did they give you in that time? And that is a really, really precious gift to give to somebody. And we can tell what big an impact it has in our own life. And it's a good thing to remember when we're showing up in the world for other people. So, on the impact on mind, body, and well-being, of course, there's going to be a major one. So, again, we're social creatures, and strong social connections are crucial for both our mental and our physical health. Our mental health is one of the ones that we can see this impact the most. So it's not just going to be, loneliness as a painful periodic emotion, but it's very linked to mental health issues. Feeling persistently disconnected will double our risk of developing depression and anxiety disorders. So people who lack that supportive relationship in their life, they will report lower happiness, lower resilience, and it can over time erode self-esteem and make coping with stress more difficult. On a physical level, it will have the same impact, believe it or not. It's comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of the metabolic, cardiovascular impact that it has on our body. It's linked with a worse physical health outcome and earlier death. And we hear about that quite a bit with older individuals, excuse me, that may have lost their partner and they're very isolated, that unfortunately it can make their quality of life drop quite a bit and bring up their risk of chronic illness. So global estimates at the moment attribute about 871,000 deaths per year to loneliness as a byproduct, which is about 100 deaths every hour. Just staggering, absolutely staggering amount. So when we look at it in terms of our biological markers, our brains, when they're socially receptive, when we're in a communion of support with others, we fire off more oxytocin and endorphins. So that will reduce stress overall. It will induce calm. It can help with chronic pain. It can help with chronic stress levels. And chronic stress levels then will be the predicating factor of deaths associated with loneliness. So when it comes to hyperconnectiveness, where's the what's the catch? So if we're constantly plugged in, we think, okay, well, look, you're talking about all these different problems that happen with chronic loneliness. Surely it's a good thing to constantly be online. For most people, before I even start talking, they can say, I can tell you from my personal experience, this is not the case. Most of us feel a heightened sense of anxiety. I know this, that when I might go to a festival or somewhere where my phone is dead for a day, my level of calm goes up exponentially. So it can be good to be hyper-connected. We saw this in the pandemic. If there's family members living in other countries, if there's responsible social media use, it's actually been linked with higher levels of well-being and social connectiveness. Now, when it's when we're speaking to, loved ones, family members, but the important part here, it's to do with the level of engagement that we have with social media. And believe it or not, which is going to come as no shock to anybody, excuse me, the more the paradox being that the more we engage with social media, actually the lonelier that we feel. Hyperconnectivity, it actively fuels loneliness, which is a very odd paradox, but studies are increasingly finding the correlation between heavy social media use and increased loneliness. Now, there's a few different predicating factors on that. One of them being dopamine cascade. So the way that we interact with social media is very akin to addictive behaviors. And with addictive behaviors, there's what's called the law of diminishing returns, which means that whatever gave us a hit in the first place, we need more of that thing to get less of a hit. So we adapt behaviors of basically being on it constantly with less and less and less return on it. And like I was saying a second ago, if we're feeling lonely and we've associated social media use as connectivity, but we feel bad when we engage in it and we feel more lonely, it it can harm our sense of, what is connection, because my experience of connection actually makes me feel bad. So it's like a hungry ghost, it constantly will need more and more. There's also the feelings of not being good enough, because of course on social media people portray that veneer of themselves. It's a mask. It's who they portray themselves to be outwardly, with no vulnerability, with no human imperfections or anything like that. So to even be accepted on social media for a curated version of yourself, would actually make you feel worse over time, because it distances you from acceptance of all of these perceived flaws that make you who you are. So it does fan that flame of loneliness association. And of course, an awful lot of social interactions online on social media are short form. They're happy birthday, or thought of you, here's a meme, or lol, or these kind of things that they're not a conversation. They're not a, hey, listen, I've been feeling not great at the moment. Most people don't have these conversations online. Some people do, but the format at which it restricts us stops us from being in relation to another human being. So that feeling of somebody sitting with you, listening to you, not fidgeting, not having their phone open, not checking the time or watching something at the same time. So even though we can have a version of, what appears to be a deep conversation via the medium of text, it cuts away an awful lot of the nonverbal markers that help people to feel connected. So if you're starting to feel like potentially this is resonating with you, if you're starting to feel that maybe you're in a period of time in your life at the moment where, there is a little bit of shallow conversations happening and you're feeling a little bit isolated, some of the markers of it could be, a persistent feeling of loneliness or emptiness, even when you're in a room full of people or around others. The inability to share your true feelings, or emotional isolation, which is basically keeping things shallow because you're either afraid it will push somebody away, or you're afraid to let go of the veneer or the mask. Having few or no close people that you're comfortable having those conversations with. And as I said, it doesn't mean that you've never had them. It just means that at this moment in life, if you were to have a particularly bad day and scroll through your contacts, there's no one that you would feel very comfortable reaching out to. And that can happen, once in a while. If you're finding that an awful lot of your socializing is superficial, and as I said, this can happen with lifelong friends sometimes, that you just enter a period of lull. Another marker could be that you're suddenly very busy. You're suddenly very productive. You're suddenly working long hours. You're suddenly hyper scrolling. You're mindlessly on the screen. That's all pointing to an inability to sit with your feelings and actually go, oh, actually, I don't feel good. There's what's his name? I have his book there. Brandon Epstein, not the other one. He's got a book called The Success Code, and in it, he talks about a very quick check that you can do with yourself, which is great, actually, is a few times in the day or whenever you remember to do it. Check in with yourself. How does it feel right now to be me? And oftentimes, that hyper productivity can be a way to run away from what does it feel like today to be me. Because most of us will distract ourselves from feelings we don't like. So if you're recognizing that there's a little bit of these happening, what can you do? Now, this is easier if you have had previous strong connections. Now, having face-to-face interactions is going to be best, and that can involve joining activities if you feel like, for whatever reason, there's stoppers to deepening relationships. This happens, for example, when, let's say, you would have been very close with a friend of yours, and a friend of yours, their partner is undergoing cancer treatment, or their child is very sick and they've had to pull away from the friendship. So this is a circumstantial thing where the people you would usually have gone to may not be as available to you. Now, you could be surprised, because sometimes, even in the face of adversity, we try to be polite and give people space unless they've, actively sought space and made that very clear. Sometimes they can feel just as isolated in their situation, and having a distraction and a way to think about something other than whatever's going on for them, even though, we try to be polite and put the social boundaries in there of, I best leave them alone now because they're going through a lawsuit, and they might lose their home, and I don't want to be bothering them with my isolation. You would be very, very surprised. And place yourself in another's shoes. They're well able to say to you, look, I don't have time for you right now, pet. I'll touch base with you again. But more often than not, we do like distraction from our own negative feelings. So if there just happens to not be a person in your life at the very moment that you can go to, doing anything face-to-face is going to be better than a range of online activities, or seeking out online activities. If you're finding yourself with a disability that stops you from going to places in person, or sickness, whatever it may be, there are online forums, but just choosing ones that are about having the deep conversation, specific subreddits, for example, on your very particular case where you can speak to people. I know someone I know recently that went through a miscarriage and felt very isolated, found that she may not have been able to speak to people in her immediate circle, but found that in particular forums, there was a space to have those conversations. So it's seeking out the spaces where you can have real talk, not surface level. You want to prioritize quality time with individuals. So making a concerted effort, conscious effort, that's the word I was looking for, to spend undistracted time. It's a phones away. Phones away. When you're meeting up with that person, phones away for an hour. If you're going for coffee, put your phone away. And you'd be surprised how difficult that is for an awful lot of people now, is put away any distraction and practice doing this. To just really not have that come into it, that practice giving your your full attention to somebody. Know what it's like to be on that side of things. Seek out people to have that reciprocated with you. Practice vulnerability and authenticity. This is difficult if you're not used to it. So you can start with small information with people that you trust. You don't have to, you can, and it'd be great if you found yourself safe enough to do that. But if you're not quite there yet, practice being a little bit more honest instead of the Asher and Grand, yeah, I'm just busy. Sure, you know how it is. I'm very tired at the moment, Asher. We're all in the same boat. Some people have it worse. Whatever it may be. Practice actually saying, do you know what? I'm not too great at the moment. Don't worry, I don't need to have a conversation where I'm looking for you to resolve it. I'm grand. I'm looking after myself as best I can, but truth be told, I'm feeling a bit isolated. And it doesn't have to be a big, heavy conversation, depending on the person that you're having it with and their suitability. Practice making it more normal to be honest, authentic, and vulnerable, because you will find that if someone can accept you when you're being honest and authentic, it will hit you here a lot more than somebody saying, sure, isn't she brilliant, when you're lying through your teeth about how you actually feel. So listening and empathizing. If you create a scenario where there is that no distraction, where you're fully listening to somebody, even if you are on the giving side rather than the receiving side, what you're going to create is an environment and a connection for the other person to speak and be heard and listened to. And even, this is the beauty of human beings, even if you're the person giving somebody that, you will feel better. You will feel more connected. You will feel more received, even if you're the person listening and empathizing with somebody else. And you can build a network of people. This is the beauty of the internet. If you have a bizarre niche interest, if you're really into crochet, if you're really into medieval battles, if you're really into 1930s jazz ensembles, if you're really into 1980s football, there is going to be a niche of people out there. Reddit's brilliant for this, Reddit if you don't know it. Reddit is brilliant for it, where you can find people that like that same thing as you do. And sometimes even microdosing these type of things is brilliant for feeling like you're among people that recognize you. So remember to nurture your existing relationships, and this can be very hard, particularly if you know for somebody for 50 years. You'll have periods of time where you both take each other for granted, but it is a practice. Creating time for intimacy is really, really important. You could be married to somebody for 40 years. Creating moments that are about no distractions, you time, having a conversation, going for a walk together is a great way, because you can't really do anything else but, walk and talk to each other. It feeds us on such a profound level. It's really, really worth doing. So that's me done for today, because I am going over time. But what I will say is, if you are feeling very isolated, you can seek support. If none of the things I mentioned feel resonant to you and you say, look, I'm actually beyond that, there are a number of free services. Samaritan's been a great one. That's just, a stranger that you need to go, I'm really not okay and I need to talk to somebody about it. It's counseling services, therapy services, but free services like that will just give you a stranger to speak to can be really, really helpful. So that's me done for today, guys. I hope you found this helpful in some way, and we'll chat to you next week. I'm back in with the regular health program. Right, have a lovely rest of your day, and we'll see you again. Bye now.